Good evening, friends. Well, it's Friday once again, and I'm back with another tale from my collection. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the night with a story I call Suspended. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you to the Dynaflux Laboratories, where today you will see the first live demonstration of our new molecular stasis weapon. That's right, suspended animation. I am Norval Stanton, Project Team Leader, Norval said, taking a short bow. I'd like to begin with a short introduction to our work, and then I'll answer any questions you may have. Norval stepped to the side and signaled for a slide to be projected on the screen behind him. A picture of various molecular structures was displayed within an area of radiating dashed lines. The dashed lines ended abruptly at larger, solid blue lines. This is a very simple graphic intended to illustrate the basic principles of the molecular stasis weapon. The molecular structures you see, the red and yellow balls, represent all organisms and objects within a target area. The dashed radiating lines are the energy waves from the weapon, and finally the blue lines are the containment barrier which prevent the weapon from acting on undesired areas. He signaled for the next slide, which showed a picture of the Earth as seen from space. Ladies and gentlemen, the Earth is surrounded by lines of force we call flux. These lines of force are responsible for the magnetic field which surrounds the Earth and protects it from solar radiation. These same lines of force also act as a conduit for molecular travel. As you know, everything on Earth is comprised of molecules, even people. How many molecules, their motion, and density all determine what a substance is. Norval stepped to a small side table and drank from a glass of water. Stasis is a state of ceased molecular motion in which nothing moves or advances and is caused by opposing forces. If you put two magnets together with their positive poles facing each other, you can actually feel the force generated as these repel each other. Conversely, if you put them together positive to negative, they attract. Another force you can feel. What you cannot see or feel, though, is the area between two positive forces which is being acted upon. This is known as the stasis field. He signaled for another slide, this time of two sets of dashed radiating arcs facing each other and several molecules in between. What we've done is to create a weapon that can analyze the flux polarity and maintain an equal and opposite field which is efficiently halting any molecular motion within the stasis field. He stopped and looked around as if waiting for applause. Again he signaled as if requesting another slide, but instead a large mechanical door to his right opened and several technicians rolled a large silver object into the room. It looked like a giant egg, and next to it were several rods about 2 meters long, each having multiple rings of varying thickness wrapped about them and a large blue lens at one end. The opposite end was pointed. This is a molecular stasis generator, and the rods you see are perimeter modules which generate the containment field. The blue end is simply a light to indicate when the unit is active. He reached over and pushed a button to make the blue lens glow. A low roar began to rise in the room as the spectators discussed what they were seeing. Norval let this go on for a few moments while he got another drink of water before clearing his throat to regain their attention. I would like to open the floor to questions, if I may. He waited for someone to respond. Mr. Stanton, a stocky gentleman stood. My name is John McGrath, Senate Oversight Committee. Yes, Mr. McGrath, Norval waited. First, I have to say that I'm pleased to announce that your project has come well within Senate Appropriations funding limits. He paused to let this sink in. But, what use really will this weapon be? As I understand it, once the weapon is armed, everything that is within the stasis field is immobilized, as well as anything which enters the field. Sure, you can stop an enemy from advancing, but how do you disarm him if you can't enter the field to take his weapons? A very good question, Norval seemed excited that someone had actually put some thought into what they were doing. We have also developed an anti-stasis vehicle with robotic arms which can enter the stasis field to do what may be needed. At this time, we're unable to miniaturize the equipment small enough for a suit to enable a man to enter the field, but we are very close to having these ready as well. Any further questions? What if a perimeter module was to fail? Someone called out from the back. In the event a perimeter module were to fail, the stasis containment barrier would shift between the perimeter modules to either side of the failing unit, which would cause the stasis field to either expand or contract, depending on module placement, he said, taking the question in stride. He was immensely proud of this achievement, and even hoped to win a Nobel Prize for it. If there are no further questions, I suggest we proceed to the testing field to see a live demonstration. Norval walked to the back of the room and exited with the observers following. They climbed aboard a bus for the short ride to the demonstration site, and he was pleased to hear the conversations en route were of a positive nature. Arriving at the test site, the observers dismounted the bus and took their places on the bleachers which had been erected for their comfort. A molecular stasis unit had already been set up about 500 meters from the viewing stand, and it was surrounded by pens of live animals. Outside the live animal pens, a ring of perimeter modules had been stationed to contain the stasis field. There was also a boundary of yellow caution tape around the perimeter modules to prevent anyone wandering into the field area. It was unbroken except for a small gateway intended to allow the anti-stasis vehicle to enter, and it was parked nearby. Ladies and gentlemen, please be assured that the animals will not be harmed in any way. They are here to demonstrate the effectiveness and safety of the molecular stasis weapon. He held up a remote control on a wire leading to the weapon. General Mays, would you like to be the first to activate the weapon? The general seemed surprised, but pleased, and left the bleachers to join Norval on the platform. He looked once at the crowd and then back to the demonstration area and pushed the button. To everyone's amazement, the animals ceased to move. Dust clouds that had been kicked up became frozen in place, and the only change anyone could detect was a low hum from the weapon. As if on cue, the driver of the anti-stasis vehicle moved within the stasis field area and, using a well-padded robotic arm, gently picked up a cow before backing out of the area. As the cow crossed the containment line, the vehicle stopped so its back half remained in the field, but its front half was out. The cow began to bellow and kick, as it obviously didn't like being lifted, but the movement was restricted only to its front quarters and head. There were several moans of disapproval, but these were quickly drowned out by laughter. The vehicle removed the cow completely from the stasis field after a moment of demonstration and deposited it soundly into another holding pen outside the field. The cow seemed no worse for wear. It was walking around, and once unrestricted, had ceased bellowing. It walked over to a trough to drink, and as if on cue, Norval began to speak. You see, ladies and gentlemen, the animal has suffered no apparent ill effects, and following previous tests, we have euthanized and autopsied several animals to ensure there was no hidden damage. As a result of this, I myself have entered a stasis field as a human subject. Norval jumped off the platform and began to run toward the stasis field. Reaching the barrier, Norval jumped the barrier as a long jumper would and was immediately suspended in midair in suspended animation. The observers remained silently stunned. "General, turn off the machine," a voice from the crowd said. The general complied immediately, and all watched as Norval completed his jump and turned around to take a bow. "As you can see, I'm fine," he stated, and walked back to the platform. "Just think of all the lives we could save with this machine, ladies and gentlemen," Orville said as he pointed to the livestock pens. "This should not be called a weapon, but a—" Orville was interrupted by a loud explosion and turned to see what had happened. The anti-stasis truck had backed into one of the perimeter modules, and some kind of reaction had caused the unit to explode. The other containment modules began to glow very brightly, and fearing an overload, he hit the button to turn the machine off. The perimeter containment modules surrounding the area exploded in unison as Norval reached out to shut it down, and he was frozen in this moment as the containment field was no longer contained. The containment field surrounded the Earth in a matter of moments. Everything within a few thousand feet above the molecular stasis generator and several hundred feet below was suspended. The machine had effectively stopped life in most every region of the Earth, except for those areas above or below the field. On the side of a cliff, thousands of feet above the valley floor below, several mountain climbers hung suspended from their ropes, trying to figure out why their partners below had suddenly stopped climbing and seemed frozen in place. One of them happened to look out away from the mountain and noticed a flock of birds suspended in midair. "Hey, look at those birds! They're not moving!" he called to his teammates. "And that cloud!" Everyone looked to where he was pointing in amazement. None of them could grasp what they were seeing. "You guys wait here. I'm going to drop back down and see what's wrong with Rick," John said, and started to descend back to his partner. The others worked to insert cams and wedges into the rock face to secure lines. It seemed their expedition had gone from a climbing to a rescue mission, and they needed to prepare. Working quickly, they secured to the rock face and made preparations to form a swing line to raise and lower teammates as needed. "Hey, help me!" John hollered up the mountain to him. "I can't move my arms or legs." The others looked at him and saw that only his head was moving. One of them lowered a rope with a loop on the end and caught hold of his free arm. Together they lifted until both his arms could move again, and he started to pull himself free. Once he had rejoined them, they made their way to a shelf to set up camp and discuss how they would rescue the others and what was happening. "I can't explain it, guys. As I moved down the mountain, I reached a point where nothing would move. I didn't feel any pain, but I also couldn't sense what was happening below my chest where everything stopped moving." John looked at them confused. Looking over the edge at his partners still immobile on the rock face below, he couldn't help but wonder if they were alive or dead. He grabbed a rope and moved it to try to hook it over the next man's body below, but each time the rope stopped moving and piled up, seemingly in midair. Out of curiosity, he grabbed a large rock and hurled it out into the void. It sailed in an arc away from the mountain until it hit the stasis field and stopped, hanging in midair. "You know, Larry is still connected to the safety line we left down there. If I was to climb down and attach another rope to the safety line, we might be able to lift him free." John looked to the others for approval. "How do we know the rope will move?" Tom asked. "When you drop a rope, it stops where you were immobilized." "True, but you were able to pull me free, so it stands to reason that anything within the dead area can be moved if something outside moves it." The others nodded in agreement, and John slipped off the ledge to work his way back down to the safety rope. Once there, he tied another rope to it and acted as a midline assistant to help the others pull Larry free. Slowly, he was lifted until suddenly he began to squirm on the line. "Relax, Larry," John shouted. "You'll be okay in a minute." Larry looked up at his friend confused. He had no idea how he'd come to being lifted up the mountain when just a moment ago he was climbing on his own. When they finally got him to the rock ledge, it took several moments before he spoke. "Somebody want to tell me how I was climbing the mountain one minute, and then I look up and suddenly I'm on the end of the rope hanging in space?" Larry held his hands tight so his body would stop shaking. "You mean you don't remember anything?" John asked. "There was no loss of time?" "No, there was no loss of time. One minute I was reaching for a rock, and the next I'm hanging in midair." Larry looked around. "What's happening?" Tom was the first to speak up. "I can't explain how it happened, but it seems as if something is causing everything below a certain elevation to just go into suspended animation. Look there." He pointed to the birds and then to the rock that John had thrown. "I don't understand it, but I believe what I see." Larry looked around in disbelief, and then let his gaze travel down the mountain to Rick, who was still hanging on the rock face. "What about Rick?" "We can't do anything for him until we figure out what's happening." We were only able to pull you up because you were tied to John's safety line. Tom shook his head. Rick is tied to the lower safety line and hadn't made it up to the switch. Larry looked at his friend again. But we can't just leave him there. What else can we do? John asked. Okay, so what's our next step? How do we get down? Larry looked around them. There's nothing above us but the barren plateau, and we don't have more than a couple days of food and water. I know, Larry, John agreed and fell silent again. Looking at the man on the cliff, Tom turned his gaze up to the plateau 1,000 feet above them. He no longer had the desire to finish the climb and only wanted to go home, but that was impossible with the stasis field below them. He began to wish he was like Rick, trapped in suspended animation, unaware of their dire situation. Thank you for spending your time with me. Tell me what you think in the comments, and I'll be sure to join the conversation. That's all for now, but I'll be back next Friday with another story, just for you. Until then, sleep well.